I think I know who made M.X.E.S, why there's Nightmare-owned plushes all over, and what the Mimic is still doing here. Today's theory is going to be probably my most controversial one yet, but I feel really strongly about it, and I do think there's solid evidence for it. And before I go into it, two things to keep in mind. One, this is just a theory, so if you don't agree with it, that's perfectly fine. And two, if it is true, I don't think any retconning has occurred. I think we just haven't had all the answers until now. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. One of the biggest mysteries about Ruin we still have in front of us is who made this M.X.E.S machine? And exactly what does it do? We hear from Gregory that it was built to conceal the Mimic, something that has been down in the FNAF 6 pizzeria for a really long time. The game pretty much begs us to ask, when was it put there, and why? Well, let's look at what we have. We'll start with the Mimic. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Mimic specifically and its origins, because I don't quite think it's important for today's theory. I'm not arguing where the Mimic came from in this theory. I'm just arguing what it's doing now and how it's being contained. But very briefly, I'll touch on what the book tells us about the Mimic. In the books, we get two instances of the Mimic, one in the story The Mimic and one in the epilogues. It could be the same one, but there are some differences, so maybe just some time has passed. It's not super clear yet. What we do know is that it was originally created with the intent to copy whatever it sees and recreate that action. Eventually, Fazbear got its hands on it and made an entire line of mimics, but scrapped it after they started copying humans in unexpected ways. In the epilogues, the main villain is a mimic endoskeleton. It begins because a construction worker programs it to take apart staff bots by ripping off the arms and head and putting them in a pile. Eventually, that goes awry when it runs out of staff bots and starts turning on the construction workers instead. Later on in the epilogues, it hunts down teens that sneak into the Pizzaplex to do the same thing. It's incredibly intelligent, shown to be able to lure teens into a room by pretending to be a kid on the radio. But the important thing to note here is that the Mimic in the epilogues doesn't seem to have any agony or malice attached to it. In the story The Mimic, we definitely see a very violent creature that is acting upon its programming tainted by agony. But in the epilogues, although it's violent and calculating, we get its perspective in the most recent edition, and it's calmly observing its environment and just trying to do its programming. All it wants to do is take off arms and heads. That's what it was told to do. It does it to a doll as it walks past, but there's no seeking to kill, it's just following its programming. Now, whether or not you believe the books are one-to-one with the game timeline, I think we can all agree that the information we get about the Mimic in this book is important to the Mimic we have in the game. If they're the same character or not, the information carries over. Sort of like how in the Silver Eyes we get William Afton, Henry Emily, and even if they aren't the exact same character, the information we get about them is crucial to figuring out what happens in the games. So what do we know about the Mimic in-game? Looking at the model of it, we can definitely tell that it was made up of many different endoskeletons. The arms and legs are all mismatched, and the head is interesting as well. Definitely big teeth, but notably fake teeth, whereas Burntrap had real teeth. Interesting. Then we have these strange things stuck to its face, which get somewhat answered when we look at the room and the secret ending. The Mimic tends to put on costumes. In its room, we see two plush and felt old mascot costumes, a circus elephant and some big bird. There was also at some point presumably a lion, seeing as the Mimic puts on what looks to be the majority of a lion mascot suit. So we're pretty safe to say that these weird pieces stuck to it is just felt and plush from the costumes that it's working with. We know that it's able to mimic voices, as it directly mimics Gregory, but also seemingly begins to mimic Roxy during their fight. We also know that it wants out. It wants to leave. It's been locked in a room for a long time. Being locked in that room caused it to mimic. Mimic? It mimicked once. And in that room, the door is shut and cemented over. Sure, there's a cave behind it, but it's blocked by a wall until the forklift crashes through. But it wasn't in this room the whole time, was it? Gregory and Vanessa know about the Mimic. Gregory tells us it's been down here a long time, but the environment tells us a lot more about their encounter with it. We see this backpack very prominently in the last room of the DLC. On it is Gregory's name, and it's right next to this collapsed vent. If you go out of bounds, you can see that this collapsed vent originally connected to the room the Mimic is currently trapped in. This was the trap. Gregory and Vanessa did what the teens in the epilogues couldn't. Gregory went into this room as bait, lured the Mimic in, and escaped through the vent as Vanessa closed the door. Then the two of them cemented it over to seal it in. They trapped the Mimic in that half of the room. So logically, they must have also built the M.X.E.S machine to keep it hidden, right? Not quite. Oh, okay, bye. Oh my god. I can't even get the lint roller this time. I'm just gonna wipe. If you look around the half of the room that has M.X.E.S in it with the mask on, you can see several deactivated security nodes. I think that this is trying to show us that the Mimic was in this half of the room at some point, while M.X.E.S was active and actively trying to turn off nodes. So if the Mimic and M.X.E.S were in this room and active before Gregory and Vanessa got there, who put M.X.E.S there? Who was there before Gregory and Vanessa? Announcement! Do you love these content creators and the things they do? Do you love charity? Do you love racing games? If all three answers were yes, then I have the surprise for you. On Saturday, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be hosting the Crash Team Racing Charity Tournament event with these amazing creators. Go follow all of them if you aren't already, but I suspect you are. All of this to do two things. One, most importantly, fundraise for Meals on Wheels, a very important charity that helps a lot of people in need. But two, to put a spotlight on a massively underappreciated but pristine racing game, Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. It'll be a lot of fun. We'll have incentives and games and little side things, but most importantly, a tournament to see who the best kart racer is. So I'll see you tomorrow on the tracks. I've stated previously that I think the father of our player character, Cassie, has something to do with this. Throughout the game, we get so many hints toward him. We know he worked at the Pizzaplex, he has a Faz wrench, he loved the franchise, his favorite character is Bonnie. And that Faz wrench he has is something that you need to even access this room. It was even installed on the forklift in there. So he would have access to the room, but he also has a reason to go there. We know from the duffel bag messages and security breach that workers at the Pizzaplex were beginning to catch on to Vanny's shenanigans. So a technician noticing something messing with the electricity and animatronics at the Pizzaplex and going to investigate it is completely possible. We even get a direct example of this with the construction crew noticing brownouts, so people knew something was going on. And if he went down there and found the Mimic causing all of these issues, creating M.X.E.S is in character for what we know about Cassie's dad. After all, his favorite was Bonnie, and the avatar M.X.E.S uses looks just like a digital Bonnie. But there's really two issues with this. First, he would have been down there fairly recently, and second, he's most likely dead. On the dead thing, Cassie only really exclusively uses past tense to describe her father. So that, plus nobody coming to her birthday party, seems to imply that he's been dead for some time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't build M.X.E.S. After all, the rabbit we see as the avatar of M.X.E.S could be his soul inside of it. Now, I do hear some of you, her dad can't be M.X.E.S, M.X.E.S kills her dad would never do that. But counterpoint, M.X.E.S doesn't intend to, or even realistically, kill anyone. From what we can see, the programming of M.X.E.S seems to be locate whoever is hacking the security protocol and alert nearby animatronics and staff bots to remove them from the premises. After all, if the Pizzaplex was fully operational, all the animatronics and staff bots are equipped with security measures to safely and efficiently remove ne'er-do-wells from the premises. It's just acting on that notion. There's no reason to believe that M.X.E.S would know that the animatronics are deadly or even want deadly force. The death part is most likely an accident. It's just calling for help. So then, if Cassie's dad being dead doesn't disqualify him from building M.X.E.S, why does recency? Look at the build of this machine. Everything in this room is older. The forklift, the canisters in the back, even the console. But the M.X.E.S machine is aged. It is rusty and bulkier than anything in that room. The paneling even is reminiscent of that 70s stained glass tile system that a lot of aesthetics used back then. This thing is much older than the rest of the technology in here, or at least has been here for a good time longer. So while Cassie's dad is very likely to have modified the M.X.E.S program, probably adding the security nodes and the M.X.E.S avatar of a rabbit, pretty much all the rabbit things seems to be Cassie's dad, the chance that he fully built this thing from the ground up and programmed its original purpose is slim. It needs to be here earlier than that. After all, Gregory says the Mimic has been down there a really long time. M.X.E.S needs to be down there equally as long. So if that's the case, who was in this room before him?
Like that, and then what also kind of influences theory. If you look behind you, like directly behind you. Right over there, go up to those cans there. That's propane. That's an accelerant or fire.
True. I mean, to be fair, this is the FNAF 6 location.
I'm thinking this is a room.
So, like,
Henry
that would add up. Oh.
Yeah.
Henry. The whole point of FNAF 6 is that the pizzeria is a trap built by Henry. If there is a really old piece of technology in this pizzeria, it would make sense that Henry was the one who made it. But if that's here, then what's its original purpose? And did that purpose include the Mimic? To answer that, we need to look at what happens in FNAF 6 and compare it to Steelwool's favorite version of storytelling in Security Breach, the environment. Everyone remembers Henry's FNAF 6 speech. It's one of the most iconic moments in the entire FNAF franchise, where we see Henry lament about what happened and tell us he's burning everything and everyone to the ground and dies. But is that actually what happens? Henry says it's time for all of us to rest, but as far as burning goes, we only see 3: William Afton, Scrap Baby, and Molten Freddy. They are burnt alive and presumably mostly destroyed, but we never see Lefty burn, the animatronic built to capture the marionette, the thing that the soul of Henry's daughter Charlotte is inside of. He says,
"It's time to rest, for you, and for those you have carried in your arms. This ends, for all of us, in communication."
It's implied that the rest he's giving her is burning her to the ground. And I admit, if anyone has logic for this, this is probably the biggest flaw about what I'm about to say. He does say it's time for all of us to rest. So if anyone can figure out that issue, let me know, because that feels like a big problem with this theory. But for now, let's move past it. Is he actually burning her? Does he burn the marionette and himself? Well, let's look back to Security Breach. At the end of Ruin, we get a personal look at the FNAF 6 labyrinth, the corridors and rooms that Henry used to burn everything to the ground. But in Security Breach proper and in Ruin, there's only ever 3 burning rooms shown. In the Burn Trap boss fight of Security Breach, and when we finally get to explore it ourselves in Ruin, we only ever see 3. And if there's a room dedicated to burning all the other burn rooms, you'd think it would be connected to every room, but there's only 3 connections. What's more, the room we suspect Henry to be in doesn't have any burners either. So did Henry burn himself and the marionette to death or not? I think this game is telling us that he didn't. That instead, he wanted to save her like Henry in the books tried to save Charlie, by making a robotic version of her. And his first attempt in doing that is using the Mimic. I'm still not 100% sure on where the Mimic originates. Whether Henry built it or maybe Tales Games is right and Edwin built it, I don't know. Hell, FNAF was really convincing on his recent theory. Go watch the full video, it's really good. But on the bright side, I'm not arguing right now on who built it. What I'm arguing is that through some method or means, this endoskeleton ends up in the FNAF 6 basement, the one Henry worked in during FNAF 6. And knowing that it can mimic voices and actions, after the FNAF 6 fire, he remains in the bunker and begins attempting to make the Mimic a perfect replica of Charlotte. He's not trying to replace her like he does in the novels. He wants to literally save her. FNAF 6 teaches us that the scooper is primarily used to inject remnant. That's what the blueprints specifically say, and that's how Michael survives as literally a walking hunk of flesh. We know this nearly for sure. So, isn't it strange that another scooper is nearby this location? I think Henry was literally trying to recreate Charlotte. Let me lay out his plan here. After the FNAF 6 fire, he has the marionette trapped within Lefty. He knows his daughter's soul is in that marionette, and he knows William Afton came up with a way to move a soul from one robot to another with his scooper. If he can just make a robot good enough for Charlie and inject her soul into it, he could literally bring her back to life. This is what William was all about, and Henry is taking a page out of his book. He will put her back together again. So he began experimenting on the Mimic and on the marionette, seeing if there was any way to combine the two. But he needed more time, and to ensure that nobody bothered him, he needed to shroud his experiments from the outside world. So he decides to conceal everything he's doing with a marionette experiment enshroudment system, MXES. This machine was built to conceal, not to harm, and not to hinder. He just doesn't want to be stopped. He knows he's getting older, and if anybody figures out what's going on, he will not have enough time to figure that out. But for whatever reason, he fails. Maybe the Mimic kills him. Maybe the marionette escapes, and that's why there's hints of Charlie all over the Pizzaplex. I'm not sure. But if he was at least about to do the final experiment, there is a chance that the scooper ending finished what Henry started. I know, right? Look, I feel good about this theory, but I recognize that it's gonna shake some things up if it's even close to true, and a lot of people, especially on Twitter, are not going to like it. But what do you think? Am I crazy here? Did I finally lose it? But if you do want to know more about Cassie's dad and how much he influenced M.X.E.S, you can go ahead and watch that video where I talk about that. In the meantime, a huge shout out to the best channel members around, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.